Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ken Yang, and I just want to thank each and every one of you for being here with us today. We've got in our attendance Susan Kim, City Councillor. Thanks for joining us. And joining us from Seattle here, Chow. Welcome. And I'm very excited. We've got a great panel here. We got people who are very excited about housing, affordability, and land. And first, I just want to acknowledge that we're on the ancestral, unceded territories of the Lekwungen people, the Esquimalt, and the Songhees nations. And as a first-generation Canadian, I'll be the first to admit that I'll always be learning about what it means to live here, to be a resident, and a recent visitor to this land. Learning about how our work around housing and the commons needs to be seen in this larger historical context and recognize the people who've lived here since time immemorial. And I hope that through this work, we can foster a more enlightened relationship to the land and its history. So I come from Toronto, where the housing situation isn't much rosier. People are getting priced out of where they grew up and had to move hours away, far from family and friends, away from job opportunities. And the homeless encampments seem to be getting bigger. And when the city comes to do their sweep, where do they go? I bet these stories sound pretty familiar here too. So several years ago, our team started building Commonwealth Canada as a nonprofit to tackle these issues by asking, how can we better steward and share public and naturally created forms of wealth? It turns out the biggest component that actually impacts our day-to-day realities of millions of people is, of course, land value. There's nothing that comes even close to the size and role of land in our economy. It makes up 60% of real estate values across Canada. But here, in urban BC, that goes up to 90%. Of all national wealth in Canada, 3/4 is in real estate, and mortgages make up 3/4 of household debt. So on one hand, land is the biggest contributor to net worths, but also poverty. And it's clear, if you want to tackle the number one source of poverty, the answer must lie in how we're able to benefit from the value of land through policies like land value tax, land value capture, as well as community land trusts and non-market housing. As we started building a community around these ideas, we quickly discovered that there was a disproportionate support and base for these ideas here in BC, and especially here in Victoria. Now, why is that? I want to invite everybody here to ponder this question, and maybe you can let me know after. We've held 3 events so far in Vancouver and in Victoria, and every single time, the turnout here in Victoria has been about the same or greater. And we're going to expect the same this week as well. And BC is one of 2 provinces in Canada that actually assesses land and building values, not just separately, but annually, which makes it a great place with a lot of reliable data to examine the impacts of land value tax. In Ontario, the last assessment was made 9 years ago. So on the outside looking in, it's abundantly clear that this is the best place to explore this and show the rest of Canada what's possible. For those of you who might be a little bit new to LVT, I like to put it this way. The reason homes are expensive is predominantly because land is expensive. And the reason that is because we have collectively valorized land value and rising land values as this prime, sacrosanct investment vehicle and our ticket to intergenerational wealth. The problem here is that the bulk of this value is created by society, by public investments, proximity to amenities, infrastructure, and jobs. When a SkyTrain station is built in a 400-meter radius around, the value of that land is going up 6 to 10 times overnight. When we hosted Paul Finch last year, the now president of the BC General Employees Union, he said, This is the largest scale wealth transfer from the public to the private sector since the founding of the province. In the last decade, BC's land value has tripled. It's gone up by $1 trillion. So I really like to think that these ideas can get through to most people, including property owning voters, even without mentioning LVT or Henry George, because I think most people can really understand from first principles that this is the most basic economic injustice and that there's got to be a better way to do things. And if we do, not only can we alleviate poverty and pain, but we can really unleash a lot of human and economic potential. So we've done a little bit of work examining what an LVT could look like under various scenarios. There's a handout that you may have seen that shows some of the work we've done in the past, showing a model of LVT tax shift that can replace property and property-related taxes, LVT that can replace income taxes, and a universal household rebate, as well as some of the work that's in progress right now. If you have any questions about that, you can talk to my colleague here, Liam Wilkinson, hello, who I really believe is pushing the frontier of this work here in Canada. All right, so we've got a great panel here today with us. We've brought together some of the brightest minds thinking and writing about housing and land. But first, I want to just acknowledge Janning Chow here, by the way, who's visiting us from Seattle. She's the board director at Common Ground USA, and we're really glad that you're here with us. Would you like to come up and say a few words?
Sure.
Give it up for Janning.
Thank you so much for welcoming me here. You guys are awesome. And I'm so sorry for our president. You guys are so much smarter than we are in choosing your leaders. So I apologize up front for that. But I am so happy to be able to share this with you, this experience with you, because land value tax is a solution. Everybody is so busy fighting over the wrong things. And we have an amazing framework here to share with you that I wholeheartedly believe in. I came across this idea when I was looking to go back to school. And I happened across a blog where the attorney there said, hey, you might want to think twice about getting into this industry because we intentionally flood our applicant base with all of these aspiring college students, and then we deliberately ensure that there are only a few seats available as far as job opportunities, so that we can milk the market as much as we can for wages, right, for attorney fees and such. So it was that line of thinking and the fact that he was a Georgist that turned me on to this path, and here we are now. I am in charge of our online spaces, the Discord, the Reddit, and this is not to say that I do this alone. There are definitely so many people involved behind the scenes. It is a new day. The next grassroots movement is going to be online based. We're going to have keyboard warriors, not just sitting at home doing nothing, but training the AI to answer questions for all of our potential leaders in our communities, because when they've never heard of something, the first thing they're gonna do is go to the internet and ask, right? And look it up and search. And we have to make sure there's good information out there. So that's mostly what we're pioneering right now. And I'm so glad that we have a pipeline that can support your efforts up here, because look at this turnout. This is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And for the record, I want everybody to know that the Georgist community in the States, I believe, is very well coordinated, is very well organized, and there's a lot that Canadian advocates can really learn from. So thank you for everything you're doing, Jenny. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one. We've brought together some of the brightest minds really thinking about housing and land. I'm going to introduce each to come up one by one, and they're going to speak for 5 minutes. First, we have Dave Thompson. He is Victoria City Councillor and Capital Regional District Director. He's principal of Policy Link, a public policy and communications consultancy. He has a background in law, economics, and geology, all things. Dave, you've come to all of our meetups in Victoria so far, and so I'm really glad that you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. If I just talk like this, is it okay?
Probably not.
Is there a
Probably
recording?
not.
Probably
No?
Better.
Okay, I'll try. Thanks very much for those kind words, and thanks for having me. I do want to give a shout out to Susan Kim, who was here. There she is. When it comes to bright minds, I have the pleasure of sitting next to Susan at council, and I always learn stuff every day. I also want to give a shout out to Jack Sandor, who is going to be up here soon. He's going to be, can I say it?
What?
Yeah, he's going to be running for council. Please vote for Susan if she runs. Please vote for Jack. I know he's running. Susan, any word on whether you're going to run? Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot. Okay, so I'm going to talk for a little bit. I am not one of the brightest minds on this subject, but I will tell you what I'm interested in and why I'm particularly interested in land value taxes. And it comes down, for me, it comes down to climate change and housing. Those are the two things that, for me, for my kids, are existential, and for me are the #1 priorities in my life right now, and I think will be for the next several years. So I'll just talk about climate change because I think housing is going to be well covered by other people. As everybody knows, the cost of the climate-induced disasters in British Columbia are unsustainable. There was an article titled that about two days ago in the newspaper. It is an existential risk for all of us. Greenhouse gas emissions globally are still not only on an upward trajectory, but they're still arcing in the upward direction. They haven't inflected yet to start leveling out, let alone coming down. Here in the Greater Victoria region, we are not on track to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets. They're still wavering along. I think in the last, 20 years or so, we've only seen 1 year where those emissions have gone down, with the exception of a couple of years where we had a recession. Okay, so the recession has really brought it down, and then the rest of the years it's either been level or gone up. And you know, we're a leading jurisdiction here. Like, we've got more density, we've got more sort of green inclined voters. We should be able to do better than that. If you look at maps of cities that show greenhouse gas emissions per capita, what you see is far lower emissions in the core of cities and far higher out in the suburbs and exurbs. So clearly land use, which is my business, has a huge influence on greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to get to LVT, believe me. So for me, a top policy priority for city governments and for the regional government is to get building to happen in the right places. And right places are compact, complete communities, walkable communities, 15-minute cities, for all the people who like conspiracies. Near transit, near active transportation infrastructure for biking and rolling, that sort of thing. That's where we need the development to happen. What we see regionally as a trend is that it's not happening that way. We are still, even in this region, mainly sprawling for a new development. So that's got to change. And that brings me to LVT. So I'm most interested in the LVT impacts on urban form. So there's the obvious stuff that everybody knows in this room probably better than me. We want the highest and best use for core urban properties. Things like surface parking just are not, a good use of land in an urban core like Victoria is. Single story, underperforming strip malls that have no heritage value, not a great use of land. So LVT, great for creating the incentives to upscale that land and build more housing and create more affordability. We're partway, in terms of the policy potential for LVT in BC, we're partway along, just because, as probably most people in this room know, when you get your tax assessment on a building, you can see the land value and the building's value. So the data is there if we want to do this. And it comes down to political will. Now, this is the political will is where I'm gonna ask for your input and hope to focus the rest of my comments. So what would need to happen to get an LVT here is that we would have to lobby the province and be successful in that lobbying. So that's the challenge. There are some risks or perceived risks for LVT that I hope to learn more from everybody here about, and how we can respond to those claims of risk. One is that, so there's some data out there on LVTs, but every city is kind of unique. And I'll point to Victoria as a fairly unique city because it's actually a core of a city. Anybody who's from out of town and far from out of town may not know it, but we've got 13 municipalities here in Greater Victoria, and Victoria itself is this small little island that is completely landlocked by all the other cities. And so you could say Victoria is a fairly unique Canadian city. Data that may apply from another city or from another city outside of Canada may not apply here. So that's the question. Is LVT universally workable, and will it provide the right incentives in all urban contexts, including urban areas that have massive sprawling suburbs and urban areas that are landlocked city cores? So that's one question in terms of building the political case for it. Another is there a risk that land on the urban periphery is going to become even cheaper because it's less attractive? I don't know the answer to that. If it did, it might encourage sprawl. Another risk that I think is a more serious risk than that one is the loss of what's called fine-grained urbanism. So we've got, we already have, even with our current tax system, which is based on property value, market value, we've got the problem of the development potential of a lot of land being the basis upon which it's taxed. And the way commercial leasing is done in Victoria, and probably in most places in BC, is through a triple net lease, which basically means that the businesses that rent the space from the landlords are paying the taxes. And so some of these small businesses that you see in older parts of town, heritage parts of town, that have kind of, they're unique, they're locally owned, and they're small, those folks are paying for the full development potential of their land. If we move to an LVT, that'll probably get worse. And so how do we make sure that we maintain that fine-grained urbanism character in our downtown streets that incidentally make downtown nice and attractive? There are ways, I'll give you a little bit of an answer to that too, there are ways to protect that, and that's where we get into zoning and development control. But I think it's an open question what the impact of LVT would be. And then the final and biggest risk that I would suggest we have is the distributional impacts. And so who are the winners and losers? What are the losers going to lose? How bad is it going to be for them? And what can we do in terms of policy design to make the losers lose less? Because as far as I've been able to see with LVT, there isn't a good, strong policy reason not to do it. So the only reason we're not doing it that I can understand is political resistance. So that's what it comes down to, I think, is addressing those political risks and seeing what we can do to come up with a response to them. So there's my area of interest for LVT, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from the people who actually know LVT.
Thank you, Dave. It's really gratifying to hear from a city councillor what they think firsthand. Do you have a copy of your book? So next we have Martin Adams. He is a systems thinker, an entrepreneur, and the author of this book, Land, A New Paradigm for a Thriving World, which you can get at Russell Books down the street for $7.99.
Yeah.
I read this before I read Progress and Poverty, which is many people's entry point into Henry Georgist' work and land value tax. And I can say confidently that you land-pilled me right away. And speaking of Henry George, by the way, I forgot to acknowledge Dr. Francis K. Paddle over here, president of the Henry George Foundation of Canada, joining us from Ottawa. And you did it in a way that is very approachable, very accessible for a broad audience, using simple, self-evident truths to show how land is at the center of many of our biggest challenges, but also our biggest opportunities. So I really recommend this book in print, but you can also read it online. Martin, thanks for joining us.
Hi everyone. I am not a public speaker, so I will use this crutch. So thank you so much for coming out here tonight. I really appreciate it. I also want to give my huge thanks to Commonwealth Canada for making this happen. Without Commonwealth's support, events like this wouldn't happen here. And also a very special thank you to Floyd and happy birthday. Not only has he generously funded this work, but he and Olivia just welcomed their second child. Congrats to you both.
And there's cake.
Some of you in this room do work in the public sector, and my wife works in the public sector too. And I want you to know that you have my deepest respect for the work that you do every day. It's hard work, I see it, and kudos to you. This year, I had the enormous privilege of becoming a Canadian citizen. When I was studying for the citizenship test, I was genuinely moved to discover that Canada was founded on the principles of peace, order, and good government. Those words have really stayed with me. Tonight, I want to talk about that third principle, good government. And how it applies to what I think is the single biggest challenge facing us British Columbians right now, housing. Right here in Victoria, the median house costs 11 times the median household income. In Vancouver, it is 13 times. In other words, it takes a young person, without the help of the bank of mom and dad, 26 years to save up for a 20% down payment. And that's assuming that they can even save 10% each year. With today's rents, many can't. And that's not expensive, it's a crisis. So people say we should just build more housing, but building more housing is not enough. And how do we know this? Well, because it's already been done. In 2016, the city of Auckland, New Zealand, tried exactly that. Massive upzoning. Since then, 127,000 new homes were built in New Zealand, in Auckland. Supply up by 25%. Their affordability ratio, however, went down from 10 only to 8. It's still an improvement, no doubt, but it's not enough. So instead of taking 20 years for a young person in Auckland to save up for a 20% down payment, it now only takes them 16 years. It's not enough. So why didn't build more housing fix this issue? When demand rises for things like cars or computers, factories make more of them. But when demand rises for housing, you have to first own the land on which to build housing. And land in good locations cannot be made. Someone else has to sell you that land first. And that's why the real estate market is not a free market. It's an entry monopoly. And this means in order for you to enter the market, someone else has to leave the market. So the land value comes entirely from location and from public investment. The schools, the transit, the parks that we all pay for. When we just focus on building more housing, the increase in land value goes straight to whoever already owns the land and to the banks through the mortgage. Not to builders, not to workers, and certainly not to the community. As long as land ownership remains an attractive investment, rents will outpace wages and also lower the returns to builders and people who own and run productive enterprises. So that's not good either. And this is partially also why Canada has a productivity issue. We cannot build our way to true affordability unless we also capture the unearned rise in land lift and use that for the common good. This is exactly what good government is supposed to do. If you do it gradually, this policy can freeze housing prices where they are today and allow wages to catch up over the next decades. It can bring affordability ratios back down to 4 to 6 times. That was the level that Canada had for most of its history, at least since the 40s, up to the early 80s. That's the difference between being able to buy a house or a home in your 20s versus, like our parents did, versus in your 40s or perhaps never. We already believe in peace, in order, and good government here in Canada. Fixing housing is how I think we can put that belief into practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You've never made me love Canada more, so congratulations. It's hard to imagine having this level of conversation in Toronto. So, so don't take it for granted. Next we have Andrew Rose. Andrew Rose is a political staffer with the BC Greens and Georgist policy reformer. His writings on LVT and the ideas of Henry George have been published by the Georgia Strait and the Paugus and Poverty Institute, formerly known as the Schockenbach Foundation. I've seen Andrew firsthand influence several political campaigns to support LVT and inject it into their platform. So when I think about LVT and Georgia's ground game, I think about Andrew. Welcome, Andrew. Join us.
Well, hello everyone.
Hi.
As your resident BC Green Party staffer on the panel tonight, I thought I could broaden the oeuvre of what we're discussing this fine evening by explaining how these ideas might be relevant to our environmental issues and how we might solve this housing crisis, get all this housing built without, torching our planet in the process. Then Dave gets up here and says, "I'm concerned about climate." Thanks, Dave. I appreciated that a lot. So instead, maybe I can start from the basics, start from the original problems that Henry George was thinking about way back in 1879 when he published his book. and see if I can just ditch my notes in which I had planned this in the entire expose just on the environmental aspect and wing this from scratch. Maybe I'm just hyperthymic enough to pull this off. So, Henry George was asking a very important question back in his heyday, in the 1870s, that people don't really think to ask nowadays. The Industrial Revolution, although we're perhaps now on the verge of our fourth Industrial Revolution, is long in the past. We've not been raised on the promise of a future where there is no poverty because we're used to centuries of economic growth that fails to erase it. People are used to accepting this as part of the status quo, used to seeing endless gains in productivity and economic growth without it lifting society's least fortunate out from their plight. Henry George was the guy who figured out exactly why this occurs, why it is possible for all this growth, all this progress to occur without abolishing poverty. And the short answer is something like this. As economic growth goes on, as productivity improves, it becomes possible to do more and more with the same plot of land, right? Its value goes up. And so the value that you can charge to occupy that land goes up. And so the rent inexorably goes up in sync with economic growth, leaving the destitute, landless poor, well, just as destitute as they were before all this progress came along. This is fundamentally the reason why we do not see the abolition of poverty with economic growth, when anyone should be able to access all this miraculous technology, education, heck, sewers that we have in the modern era, and use it to make money. And indeed, by historical standards, the wage of a McDonald's worker is a princely sum, but of course it all gets sucked up in the form of rent, and in the form of the increased expenses of all the goods which have to be that expensive to employ people and keep them able to even meet that basic threshold of rent. So we see this at the same time that we see that these basic ideas, the bringing of land under public ownership, through these policies can also bring about a massive economic boom, and indeed also bring about the environmental gains that I alluded to earlier in my speech and that Dave pulled out from under me. Because he also brought with him a solution, which starts with the declaration of a fundamental civil right, which we should be able to recognize as an obvious thing. Equal rights to nature, and not just an equal right to nature, but also a means of delivering that right to the public. What Henry George proposed was that anyone, of course, should be able to occupy land, which is necessary to live, to do business, but so long as you are doing that, you're taking away the opportunity of others to occupy and use that land for themselves. So it would make sense to simply compensate the public for the loss of those opportunities through what we know today as a land value tax, although we at Commonwealth Canada are looking into perhaps substituting that term for land value return, since as the unpopularity of carbon pricing has proved under tax branding, people really don't like things that are branded as taxes. But the basic idea, the bringing of nature under public ownership and compensating the public for the loss of its natural resources is actually the idea behind carbon pricing. The same thing that keeps people locked inexorably in poverty is the same basic dynamic that will inevitably drive us toward environmental collapse until we, to use some economic speak, internalize the externalities. Carbon pricing works because it brings the climate under public ownership. It establishes that that is our biosphere. Everyone has a right to a stable climate in which our crops do not fail, in which your house is not blown down in a hurricane, in which 800 plus people don't die in the summer of 2021 due to an unsurvivable heat wave. If British Columbians in the room, which is most of us at least, know what I'm talking about. Remember how terrible that year was. We should be able to recognize these as basic rights. Carbon pricing does this. It subtly establishes the climate is our common wealth. Everyone needs this to survive. And so, if you need to do some beneficial economic activity, if you need to burn some fuel, which of course, for the foreseeable future, we're going to need to do to at least some extent, you can, so long as you compensate the public for it, such that they are no worse off when that pollution has been released into the environment. You compensate the public for that damage by paying into the public finances in the form of money. With this done, it becomes impossible for any economic activity to proceed that leaves the public worse off through the destruction of our common wealth because you've compensated the public for it. On the flip side, this of course implies that we should subsidize those economic activities that have positive side effects. My favorite example personally is carbon negative cement, which should enjoy an economic advantage in this economy, but doesn't until we implement the subsidies that would reflect the benefits to the public that the manufacturing of this cement in our buildings would bring about. And so that is why we're gathered here today. I hope by beginning with the theory, with the origins of these ideas, I've communicated a bit of how mind-bogglingly huge the implications of this are. It's wonderful to have an event focused on housing like this, and indeed, the implications for housing are fantastic. If you stop taxing buildings and tax only the land that they're sitting on, and you take taxes off of labor and everything else that goes into managing a construction company and putting housing up, it should be obvious that this will result in a construction boom and result in the provision of so much more housing that we so desperately need. But if you focus only on housing in a targeted event like this, it's easy to lose sight of how truly transformative these ideas can be and how they lie simultaneously at the root of continued poverty despite economic growth, and also at the root of our environmental problems. And that is truly why we're here today. Thank you so much for hosting me and all of our other wonderful panelists. And I believe I should be handing this mic back to Ken at this point. Perhaps I've rambled enough. Thank you.
What I really love about how you talk about this, Andrew, is that you show us that these principles, these ideals, actually apply to so many parts of our world. Natural resources, the commons, but actually the principles behind land value tax go so far beyond housing as well. Lastly, we have Jack Sandor. He's a lifelong Victoria resident, an electrician, a local housing and urbanism advocate. He recently stepped down as vice president of Homes for Living, a volunteer housing advocacy organization, in order to run for Victoria City Council. He's focused on making Victoria more affordable and livable for working class people. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with such intelligent people who definitely seem to know more about this than I do. I was going to sarcastically thank Dave for stealing my bit about the climate, and then Andrew did that. So now I really have nothing. I guess for a little bit of background about me, as was mentioned, I'm an electrician by trade. I took my Red Seal exam on Halloween, still hoping to see positive results back from that. But a lot of the initial experience I got as an electrician was out in the West Shore, because that's where we build a lot of our housing, because we don't build it here. And one of the most radicalizing things for me when it came to housing policy and land use was seeing the environmental devastation that comes from that sprawl, right? It's not just the endless asphalt paving that's required, but just the amount of beautiful and pristine nature that gets destroyed when we force our cities to grow outward instead of upward was a really eye-opening moment for me. So my interest in land value tax comes primarily from its ability to encourage efficient land use. That's what I'm most interested in. But of course, as was mentioned, I'm a big affordability advocate as well. And when housing is treated as an investment, in order for it to be a good investment, it must outpace inflation. Otherwise, that's a pretty crappy investment. But if it's outpacing inflation, that means it's getting less affordable every single year. There is no world in which owning housing, at least, is a good investment where housing can ever be affordable. It's simply not possible. So I'm also very excited for the possibility of land value tax improving that. I'm pretty excited for the discussion. So there's more I could say, but I'll leave it there for right now. We can hop into it.
Thank you. I want to thank Andrew for introducing Jack and suggesting you to be part of this, because you've made the case that for these ideas to win, we need the support of the housing and the urbanism communities. So thanks for being here with us. I'm just going to start off with a question for the whole panel, and I'm going to approach this as kind of like a naive outsider from outside of BC. The province has experimented with a number of taxes and charges around property with the goal of incentivizing better land use more efficient use of housing. For example, there's the SVT, speculation vacancy tax. There's the vacant home tax that there's been calls for a surtax on luxury homes. And so these are all very targeted policies aimed at a narrow outcome. And I'm just curious, what do you think about these? Do you think they've been effective? And what is it about LVT you think that is a little bit different than this bundle of targeted policies?
So my answer to this is actually somewhat, might be surprising. I'm actually less interested in what the effects are of those taxes, and I'm more interested in why do we have such a patchwork of different taxes. And I have a theory, and I might be wrong here, but I have a theory, which is that the average politician, they want to have their cake and eat it too. So they want to be able to say, yes, we are for affordable housing, and by the way, let's not introduce this tax because this could lower your home value, right? So that is a typical politician who wants affordable housing, or at least wants to say that they are for affordable housing, while at the same time introducing these small little taxes here and there that look like they're doing something for affordable housing or to help the city make more money, but I think oftentimes hide the real issue. So that's just kind of my 2 cents.
Anybody can chime in. Any point.
That's a little more comfortable. Thank you. But yeah, if I'm to continue the theme from my speech, land value tax or land value return, as I think we would probably move to the new terminology just to sell it better. It strikes exactly at the root of exactly what's going on. Regardless of whether you're living on a plot of land or whether you're buying many purely to speculate on them, well, as one notable quote I read, I forget which newspaper a couple years ago noted, the speculation is coming from inside the house. Regardless of whether you're living there or not, you're owning that land and you're benefiting from it going up in value. And you're soaking up all of this land rent, whether you're using the benefits yourself, living on it, working on it, or whether you're charging rent to someone else for them to be able to live on that land, you're enjoying the benefits. And you're enjoying those benefits, of course, without producing them. And if you're not producing them, someone must be. This gets back to the roots of poverty that I was talking about earlier. And only land value tax or land value return sweeps and does this across the entire economy in an elegant and simple fashion. Because, of course, we're sitting on a rather valuable plot of land right here in Victoria. And I think everyone here can recognize that the land under this building is in a very desirable location in the middle of Victoria, a prosperous, lovely city that I myself am very happy to live in. But you might ask, why is this plot of land so valuable? Of course, it's in the middle of Victoria. Well, the question might get a little clearer if you ask, what would happen if everyone else in the city packed up and left? And you're left with this isolated rectangle of dirt in the middle of a dead city, or perhaps the wilderness. Obviously, this would not be very valuable. Even if the rest of the city remained here, it would quickly begin falling apart, and there would be no one to trade with, no businesses to visit, no one to keep the lights on and the sewers working. This is because land rent is generated by the surrounding community, not the landowner. And with this in mind, knowing that the rent can only continue to be extracted so long as the surrounding community continues working and investing in the surrounding area and making this location desirable, if you keep this in mind, you can realize, wait a minute, land ownership as it currently exists is an invisible form of wage theft. And that's what land value tax undoes. It allows the contributions of both labor and investment to be returned to those who created them in the form of all the government services that it can fund, thus undoing poverty at its root, because all of these funds are no longer being taken out of the pockets of the worker, because all of that rent that they create is restored to them through public services. Just to repeat myself slightly, because they're very new and mind-bending ideas.
I'll just add that's good analysis, and half of it went over my head, but I do plan to read more of your stuff. I did want to speak to taxes just a little bit, just from the politician perspective. they often have a goal of revenue raising, they often have other goals. So if we take the speculation and vacancy tax, for instance, the goal there, one of the stated goals was to drive down vacancies. And interestingly enough, as part of the information you have to submit to the government every year, you have to tell them whether your property is vacant or occupied and by whom. And what we found is since the tax was imposed, we got the data on where the vacancies actually are. There's far fewer vacant properties in BC than we thought there were. And within the first 2 years, the number of vacant properties went dramatically down. So there's lots of reasons why taxes get imposed. It's usually political, like I can't remember what the saying is, but the maximum it's like plucking a chicken. You want the maximum amount of feathers with the least amount of squawking. I do want to speak to one particular tax, which is a horrible. Well, it's not a horrible tax, it's a horrible tax exemption, the capital gains exemption, which I will tell you has benefited me by hundreds of thousands of dollars as a landowner, as a homeowner. It's the only major source of wealth increase in our country that isn't taxed. It's unearned income, and I did not do anything to experience an increase of $500,000 in the value of my house. I sat on it, I didn't pay taxes on it. It's deeply unfair to people who aren't property owners. Just wanted to put that little pitch out there for general tax conversation.
If I'm going to add one more thing. A particular bugbear that did get a demonstration of on a small scale of no blame, Dave, it's the same thing to do with the way the economy is run right now. But the dynamic that he alluded to, just the ability to buy up land and soak up all of this wealth without earning it, because society continues investing, continues working in the surrounding area and making it valuable to exist, to live, to hoard land in that location. This, of course, is the dynamic at the heart of the dreaded private equity that so many in progressive spaces are very justifiably up in arms about. Groups like BlackRock and or Blackstone, I can never get those two straight, buying up increasing fractions of the real estate market. Or you can also look at this happening on a smaller scale, landlords buying up multiple lots. There are two dynamics at the heart of this, both of which the transition to this new source of revenue nukes fundamentally. The first is just the obvious dynamic toward land concentration, of course. If you own land, you can charge rent, which allows you to buy up more land, which allows you to charge up more rent. This would, of course, lead land to concentrate in the hands of fewer and fewer people over time until, wait a minute, this is feudalism, isn't it? But there's actually another way that in their own reports to investors, these private equity groups have revealed would destroy their business model. They're betting on continued scarcity of housing, buying up these houses that they assume will continue to appreciate in value because there simply won't be enough of them to serve the population. Moving to this new revenue model, of course, makes it easier and easier to build. You take taxes off of construction labor. You take taxes off of buildings once they're constructed. And it makes more and more sense to do all this construction, thus driving down the value of existing housing, making it more affordable, and destroying the plan of these private equity firms to benefit from speculating on a shortage.
Yeah, the word feudalism is making a huge comeback.
Yeah, I love that for us. It's fantastic.
Not just the word.
Yeah. So we've heard several references by now about the political realities of solving the housing crisis. And I just want to ask a question that is partly in response to, Martin, what you said about building, the path towards affordability and where that is. So a big part of the housing debate is focused on the supply, which is obviously a no-brainer. We should be building way more housing, like way faster. There's a lot of focus on legalizing housing. There's so many types of houses. There are homes that are illegal, you just can't build them. Zoning reform, we should be removing red tape and impediments. I really love like standardized housing designs. Those are all great. But at the same time, it really feels like mainstream housing policy and also political appetite really doesn't want to rock the boat with home prices. And they did a poll, changing the capital gains exemption is a surefire political suicide. So, like, how do we reconcile this tension? Like, what's the path to affordability in light of this this conflict?
Yeah, I can speak to reconciling the tension a little bit. It's definitely not easy. A lot of political questions aren't, but this one is particularly a hot button issue. But I think what needs to be focused on more is that while people like Dave might see enormous home equity gains from the shortage, there is also a lot that is lost as well, and it's harder to see, and I think that's why it's less top of mind for a lot of people. But when housing is expensive, local businesses have a harder time attracting and keeping workers, and they have to raise their prices. It means that if you're older, your kids are much more likely to leave and to not be near you, so you lose your family. There are so many consequences that we are only just starting to properly grapple with from high housing prices, and I think focusing on that is a really good way to make people see that while yes, you may benefit financially in some ways, you do also get screwed in a lot of ways. It hurts everybody when housing is incredibly expensive. While your home equity may go up, that does not necessarily mean that you have purely benefited from it.
Yeah, Martin, you mentioned the opportunity to stall home prices. And over the last few years of working on researching housing policy and LVT, I've always come to learn that might be as far as some policymakers would be willing to message. Anything that sounds like it could crash home prices is a no-go. But maybe the limit is if we could maybe just reduce how fast home prices grow, or maybe stall, that might be safe enough for housing policy, for policymakers to talk about. And that could be one thing for LVT to be messaged as.
Yeah, I'll just add, there's a lot of different types of homes. Because I'm in Victoria, I'm very obsessed and focused on Victoria. And 61% of Victoria residents are actually renters, and 81% of Victoria residents live in some form of attached housing. So the equation here is very different from a city where it's predominantly suburbs and people own their single detached homes. My focus in Victoria is on increasing the supply of rental housing. So you don't necessarily have those big economic losers in the case of increasing the supply. What you do have is a minority, I would say, definitely, very vocal people who oppose construction near them, or a very small number of people who oppose construction anywhere, because that's just kind of their hobby. But what we can do in a place like Victoria is dramatically increase the supply of rental housing without necessarily bringing down the value of single detached homes anywhere. And perhaps when you think about other municipalities and their suburbs, their existing suburbs and their core areas, if we're building in the right places, near walkable communities, near transit, near active transportation infrastructure, we can simply increase the amount of housing that is lower cost housing, because attached housing is much lower cost per unit than single detached homes, of which 80–90% of the value of single detached homes is actually in the land. So use land more efficiently, build far more homes. I'm sorry to tell everybody in Canada now that the dream of owning a single detached home is simply not going to happen for a lot of people. And I say that with the full knowledge that as a privileged homeowner, it doesn't sound good coming out of my mouth, but it's the reality. And so if we're moving to become more like European countries where more people are in attached housing and more people are renters, I think we can solve the affordability problem without developing the huge political resistance of reducing home values.
I just want to say that is one of the best, if not the best, responses I've ever heard to that question. Super. Yeah, thank you.
Give them the nutmeg.
I think most politicians kind of dance around the problem. You've addressed it head on, and yeah, a little more rental housing.
Yeah, with regards to the political viability of the ideas, there's one very specific angle that I'm qualified to address this from, and this is what is the reaction you get when you start talking about these issues among my fellow Greens? I might as well outline this. And typically, when I raise these ideas with Greens, their reaction is the same reaction that I had when I first learned about this, which is tepid support. When you explain the ways in which these reforms can yield some benefits, you think, oh, well, that sounds reasonable. Maybe we should do some of that. Maybe replacing this tax with this new revenue source might yield some benefits. In my case, it took repeated exposure to realize, wait a minute, that same dynamic applies to taxation in general, and this could be used to transform the entire model of revenue extraction that government runs on, that we use to fund things in general, because the same basic dynamic, when you take a tax off of beneficial economic activity and put it onto resource consumption, you get more beneficial economic activity with less resource consumption, and that applies to every conventional tax you can name. Yeah, it took repeated exposure to digest more and more just how big the implications are. But one particularly useful device for selling it to an environmentalist-minded audience might be this. My amazing girlfriend Patricia, who is sitting in the middle of the audience right over there, is currently doing her PhD in environmental sciences through University of Sao Paulo and visiting at UVic right now. And she published an umbrella review this year about sustainability narratives in the clothing industry, and about the various academic proposals for reform that have been proposed without doing broad economic overhauls that change the underlying incentives that motivate businesses to do things the way they do. And she found something really troubling. Well, none of these proposals really deal with these underlying incentives. Some of the things that she names in her paper are things like consumer education and various technological leaps and circular business models. But the thing about these things is that any business adopting them is adopting objectives other than simply profiting and growing the business and being able to reinvest in research and development, in running your business better, in opening new locations, etc. And all of these things are ultimately distracting causes that will cause the business to be less commercially viable in the marketplace and cause it to be easily outcompeted by businesses that are less scrupulous and find themselves willing to torch the planet to make a profit that they can then invest in outcompeting the competition. We have to do away with this underlying dynamic so that all of these brilliant fixes, like technological leaps, like circular economy design, benefit corporations, all of these things you can name, actually have the underlying incentive to succeed, so that we can align environmental good with the private good. The takeaways for selling to an environmental audience: repeated exposure is really good, and explaining how you can, by simply pricing in the environmental costs of business decisions, you can make it so that the person making the decision is the person who bears the true costs and will enjoy the true benefits, such that a decision is made only if the environmental costs are worth it. And then, all of these more direct devices that do the direct environmental good become commercially viable, and it becomes possible to deploy all these wonderful ideas at scale.
Andrew, I can see how you're building an entire base of Georgists. Yeah, Floyd? Floyd Manescu, everyone.
I'm a co-founder of Commonwealth Canada, and one of the things that I tend to fixate on with this, and I want to turn on this recording in my meta classes just to be good for the video editing, and is productivity, national productivity. So I want to say a bit of what I've been thinking about, then have the panel respond. But going after what you were just saying, people don't realize that $1 off income tax, it's $1 off someone's wage. $1 off of a land value tax is actually $1 away from a mortgage, or more, maybe $4. I forgot what's the multiple of like LVT versus reducing land value, which reduces the amount that would go towards a mortgage. We have like $2 trillion in mortgage debt in this country last 2 checks. Well, what if, in a post-LVT scenario, what if that was only 600,000 Canadian dollars in total mortgage debts? That would be like after a maximalist solution's been implemented 20 years later. But such an economy would be so healthy, because all that money that would have gone into private debt is instead coming back to society through government services, through rebates, through cash in people's pockets. That's an incredibly productive economy. That's money that we have. All this stuff you see in the media about, like, we need more investment, more private investment. We already have all the money. It's just going to the wrong place. If people's money was going into productive businesses instead of into bank debts, like, that would be, we have the money right under our feet. It's here, it's now, it's just being misallocated. And I think about that a lot. Like, that's like a really important narrative that we can inject into the public discourse around Canada's productivity challenges. Like, we don't need more foreign investment. We need our existing investment allocated properly and not wasted. And another angle to that, I guess I'm not asking, I'm kind of telling, sorry, but I do want to hear your take on it, is the central bank can only do so much to increase productivity when lowered interest rates end up creating asset booms. Like, we saw it, right, just in 2022. So, like, eventually, like, we are seeing a decline in overall productivity. It's not all, everyone likes to blame the liberals, but the whole world is seeing it. Like, capitalism is kind of slowing down. I think AI will actually, might boost it a bit, but will then slow it down ultimately, because people have less spending power when we're not making enough money from their jobs, competing with robots. So, like, eventually you have to lower interest rates, maybe even to negative rates, for any economic activity at all to be profitable. Well, that just means more asset bubble booms, unless you have an LVT, unless you have some way to restrain land from capturing all these gains and speculative gains. The LVT is the essential missing link to ever achieve lowered interest rates, zero interest rates, negative interest rates, to maintain a functional market system as productivity is slowing down. That's one of the conclusions in the book Sacred Economics, a huge book on negative interest rates. In one sentence, he says, well, none of this is possible without land value tax. He should have written the freaking book about land value tax. You know, like that's the missing link first. And we're gonna get there. I bet you in 20 years, like, interest rates will be near zero. So make your investment plans accordingly. But we need to solve the issue of how that affects asset prices, or else it's just, again, more of the same. More money going to the wealthy, more renters being displaced. And anyway, so are there other narratives? What do you guys think about that? And other narratives related to national productivity that are relative to this conversation? Sorry, I just put myself on the panel. Thanks.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right to focus on our lack of productivity. I mean, I read recently that in 1 year in Vancouver, the total equity gains in property were higher than every single dollar earned by every single worker in the entire city of Vancouver. Right? I mean, that's, I don't know about you folks, but I don't know if that's how we want to be running an economy. It makes absolute sense that our productivity would tank when it's that valuable to simply just buy and hold real estate. I mean, if you have money you're looking to invest, why would you do anything else with it? And I think we're seeing the results of that right now.
If I can just add that people talk about REITs, real estate investment trusts, taking over housing, and it's a real problem because they do buy up a lot of housing, and a lot of them are founded on the business model of buy it cheap, put in some flimsy renos, and sell it expensive, or rent it expensive, kick out your tenants. But the reason that REITs are interested in this stuff is because it's got a crazy high return on investment, much higher than it should. And if we want to stop the financialization of housing, we've got to make it a lot less profitable to speculate on the housing. I also wanted to add that I really liked Andrew's point about calling it resource use, right? We should be taxing resource use. We should be, there's this expression, tax bad's not goods. And actually my introduction to LVT was in writing some research papers on taxing pollution instead of taxing jobs. But I really do like looking at it as resource use and resource hoarding, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. We want, a revenue model that encourages people to produce the most possible wealth. We like wealth. We like having housing, a form of wealth, among others. Produce the most possible wealth from the least possible resources. Absolutely. with regards to what Jack was saying about Vancouver, there's a reason this is happening in Vancouver of all places in particular, why the housing crisis is so uniquely bad there of all places. And that's that, and this is oddly not very well known, but Vancouver has the lowest property taxes, which are mostly just land taxes, out of any major city in all of Canada and the United States. They're behind only Whistler, but Whistler isn't a major enough city to attract huge investment or a huge rate of appreciation in migration. And of course, when you have land that you can just occupy without having to compensate the public for it, well, its value is going to go up faster and there's a reduced holding expense. So what happens, quiz time, see if anyone can figure this out. What happens when in all of Canada and the United States, you let people hold and invest in land in exchange for less tax dollars than anywhere else? Or perhaps look at it from the land speculator's perspective. You're looking to dump money in land and see its value go up. Perhaps extract a lot of rent as you do so. Are you going to dump it somewhere where land taxes are high? Or are you going to go to the place where the land taxes are lowest and speculate there? Obviously, you're going to go to Vancouver and buy up and hoard land there. That is where you will get the best return on your investment. Jack also alluded to the productivity losses, which I think was where this question originally was intended to go. There was actually a parallel case back in Henry George's day that was part of how he realized the structural roots of poverty. There was a railroad building boom in the mid to late 1870s back in the United States, when railroads were new technologies. Wow. Maybe we could actually build some railroads today with all this modern technology we've invented since then. But what Henry George observed, and what many observed, was that wherever the railways were laid down, there was a massive economic slowdown. All this infrastructure that made it so much more valuable and added so much to the productivity caused a depression. How is this possible?
Because the rents went up.
Because the land value goes up, everyone wants to speculate, and all of the money is taken out of productive investment and into land speculation. So of course there are productivity drags when you incentivize the dumping of money into land hoarding instead of productive investment. Key distinction.
I think there's beginning to be a mainstream appreciation of this among policymakers and pundits, because Canada is ranked last in productivity among the G20. This is a big deal.
One thing I want to mention on this too is I really think we can do a better job of bringing business leaders on board here with this, because on Twitter and other places I see Canadian business leaders saying, yes, we should build more housing and we should do this more, do that more, build more, but they don't realize that while they're focusing on building, that there's this constant drain that sucks the energy out of the economy, which is the land speculation or the land value going up. So I don't think, I think that it would be really helpful to have more business leaders realize this and kind of focus on that more, rather than just on building. It's like building with your hands tied behind your back.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things is when I find a real estate developer or a realtor or a real estate investor talk about LVT and really understand it from a fundamental level, right? Because this is pro-business, this is pro-productivity. Did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just gonna piggybacking off this and tagging on something that was talked about earlier with real estate investment trusts. I'm writing a thing about this, a piece called "Real Estate Investors Love When You Don't Allow Housing Construction," and I think someone hinted at it earlier. They just say it outright, right? So lots of these companies are publicly traded, and they're required to disclose to their investors what their basic business strategy is. They don't have to go into explicit detail, but they have to say broadly how they make money. And so to quote from Minto, which is a Canadian real estate investment trust, significant barriers to entry, protect incumbent owners from increased competition, and continue to contribute to favorable supply-demand fundamentals. This supply-constrained market creates a compelling investment opportunity for investors. Right? And you can find it through any REIT that's public. They will say exactly the same thing. They just say it in plain English in public. We make a crap ton of money when you don't let anyone build housing. So the people who invest massive amounts of money and contribute to these problems, they all know this, and they've known this for quite a while. So it's good that we're starting to wake up and realize it ourselves, because they've known for a long time.
We have a question from our audience member here. You want to come on up?
Yeah, sure.
What's your name?
Hey, I'm Tristan. Thanks. So I'm not sure how much of a tangent this is, so hopefully you guys will be able to like rein me in a bit if it's a bit out there. But listening to the sort of story of the land going up in one place and like the question of like why is it actually going up being because of the value that's being generated by the surrounding land and the work that's being done in the surrounding land, and that this is sort of a hidden form of wage theft, and that sounds very compelling to me. But I'm also hearing a lot of use of this word speculation, and I'm a huge fan of, for example, Max Tegmark's book Super Forecasters, and that the value of being able to accurately predict the future. And that seems like one of the key values of capitalism, and the reasons that it's taken off so much is this ability to invest your knowledge of the future into making value for yourself. And so I'm wondering how this value, or the concept of the dynamics of the land value tax, which seem very appealing, would play with that sort of value of using speculation, using prediction of the future as you know, part of the dynamics that are valuable here. Thanks.
Thanks, Tristan. Anybody have something to contribute?
I'm unable to fully answer your question because it's complicated and I'm frankly not that smart. But I do think it's just important to define exactly what kind of speculation we're talking about, because even in housing, speculation is not always such a bad thing. For example, if you're speculating that a lot of people will want to live in an area, and so you build some apartments there, right? That's a fine kind of speculation, right? At least in my view. The speculation that I believe we're all talking about curbing is speculation purely by owning, right? That's what I think we want to discourage. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm unable to provide more detail on your question.
Yeah, with regards to predictability being nice and us really liking it when there isn't a massive economic crash every few years, when, you know, a bubble runs ahead of the appreciation of land values and eventually it bursts and we're left holding the bag like in 2008. I didn't like 2008. I don't know anyone who did. Would not do again. But yeah, this happens because, you know, land is treated as an investment vehicle, and so of course you get this cyclical bubble behavior when, you know, the investment roars and roars and roars ahead of the growth in its actual value. The more and more we turn land into a public asset rather than something that can be privately owned and speculated upon in a gambling adjacent fashion, the less severe these bubbles will be until they eventually disappear entirely when we complete the transition and the public owns all of the rent that it creates through its own work and investment.
I think in this context, land speculation could simply mean owning land to profit from it, right? Instead of owning land to use it. Property owners, homeowners, they usually buy land to use it, not to speculate with it. Real estate developers also, generally speaking, build houses to earn money from their housing, supply of housing, not necessarily to buy land, wait 5 years, sell it for more money. That is a speculation. Yeah, I just wanted to define those two.
The word itself feels a little bit loaded, because on one hand, speculators help price discovery, and that's really important for markets. But at the same time, when you talk about real estate speculators, there's kind of loaded. Right?
I think because we all know intuitively, even if we've never heard of land value tax, even if we've never heard of Henry George, I think most of us know intuitively that you shouldn't be speculating with land, or there's something not quite right about it. That's my guess.
I'll just add great comments from everybody. I'll just add that sometimes, depending on the situation, developers will buy land with a view to building homes on it, thinking, okay, I'll profit from the homes, whether I sell them or whether I rent them out. But there are places in Canada where developers don't really do that. They are middlemen who see farmland on the suburban fringe buy it and just want to change the zoning so that they can increase the value of the land, and that's it, and then they sell and they're out. The reason they're able to do that is because the zoning rules are tight and difficult and complex, and they know how to navigate them, and the average person doesn't. And so those developers are highly in favor of tight zoning rules. And I won't name any names, but there is one in Victoria who is a suburban developer and has strongly resisted any reform to zoning, and proves to me that that's one of the areas we need to look at if we're going to take some of the speculative profit out of housing.
Wonderful. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. As advocates, we can often make perfection the enemy of progress. So there's this kind of Georgist ideal of LVT, of the single tax. And then there are supporters of LVT that don't call themselves Georgists, but they understand the benefits of this policy. In your mind, do you think there is what's a politically realistic, if imperfect, implementation of this that could meaningfully still shift us towards this ideal of sharing the rental value of land?
I can give an incomplete answer to that, which is to say that I think that the way you bring in a tax can be perceived as less bad. So phasing in a shift towards land value taxing from overall property value taxing, so maybe you do it at 5% a year over 20 years, and you tell members of the public, here's this group of losers over, first of all, there's going to be winners and losers in any policy change. Well, let's focus on alleviating the burden on the losers. Let's introduce some policy mechanisms that are going to benefit them, and let's also tell them exactly how much it is. Is it like maybe it's $20 a year? If we can achieve far greater things, there's still going to be people who object to that. But I think anything we can do to soften the political resistance.
I just want to talk about this real quick. I wrote this book in 2015. It got published in 2015, and I interviewed so many economists at the time for this book. And what's interesting is most of them danced around the issue, around the political issue, because it was so thorny. And they were like, usually they didn't talk about how to introduce it, just that you should introduce it. And it was only recently until I saw Ken mention incrementalism that I realized you could actually introduce it in a way that you just suggested, which is gradually you can phase it in over time, 20 years, right? It's just gradual. There would be shifts, but overall, by and large, what if real estate stays about the same? Initially, if you announce it, there might be a drop, hopefully not too much, but it would level out, wages would catch up, and we would live in a far more productive economy. In fact, the economy would become so much more productive that likely those real estate values could go up again because of the increase in productivity.
Yeah, Martin's absolutely right about the viability of gradualism. The beauty of this whole grand transition is that you can do it one little bit at a time by gradually replacing conventional taxation with Georgist resource pricing. Fantastic. You can just gradually whittle down every conventional tax you can name and make the transition gradual, so the transition shock isn't too bad. Our productivity gradually ratcheting up and up and up as beneficial economic activity is taxed less and less, and we are compensated more and more for any pollution, which, by the way, in a world of encroaching authoritarian terror, is just about, in my opinion, the most powerful lever that is within reach for democracies to outgrow, overpower, outcompete the authoritarians. Show people that democracy can work once again, but that's a whole other point. In terms of immediate viable steps, there is one specific to the province of British Columbia that I'd like to emphasize very clearly. In British Columbia, incredibly, we actually already do this just a little bit. Anyone heard of the property tax? I think I mentioned it earlier. We've heard of property taxes. Now, the property tax is a bit of a misnomer because it's actually two completely unrelated taxes stapled together into one misleading name. The property tax is two things. First of all, it's a land value tax. Incredible. We have just a little bit of this already, but it's far too small to, put an end to the cyclical booms and busts, the 2008 recessions, and far too little to put a stop to all this horrible land speculation that is sucking investment out of the productive sectors of our economy. So it's very small. The second part of the property tax is, there are many worthwhile candidates, but in my opinion, my favorite, most objectively insane thing about the housing crisis, it's a tax on buildings. Why do we have a tax on buildings in the middle of a crisis level shortage of buildings? The answer is beyond me. But the existence of this gives us an immediate viable lever for immediately making a difference, making construction more viable and moving a few inches along on this grand transition. Simply delete BC Assessment's mandate to assess buildings. BC Assessment is the government body that determines how much each property is worth. It assesses the buildings and it assesses the land they sit on. If it no longer assesses buildings, then data on building value will no longer exist, and every municipality in the province will be forced to switch to pure land value tax overnight. This is an utterly painless step that will actually make government simpler and cheaper to run. Incredible, without requiring any investment. It's the most painless, obvious step I can think of, and yeah.
Love it.
By the way, Andrew's article is titled, "We Shouldn't Be Taxing Housing in the Middle of a Crisis."
And it's a very good point, and it applies to a lot of other areas as well. I don't have too much to add on the nuts and bolts details of how we would implement this, but if I could hijack Ken's role for a second. I am interested to hear what the rest of you think about how we build a viable political coalition for this. Because it's all well and good for us to sit here and speculate on how exactly we might go about implementing this, but at the end of the day, governments right now aren't, at this moment in time, willing to do it, right? I know the city of Victoria through UBCM asked the province to, not even asking the province to do this province-wide, all the city asked was, can you please allow us to do it? We would like to do it. And the province said, no, you may not. So I'm interested to hear what you folks think about how we go about building a political coalition that can demand this, because it's already pretty difficult to get people riled up about an issue that can be fairly simple, like housing, but getting, I'll say regular non-nerds, and I say that with love, I myself am a nerd, but getting non-nerds to care about tax policy is really hard. So yeah, I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on that.
Great question.
Here I am shaking my head. I should have ideas on how to build political coalitions. I'm going to have to defer to folks in the audience who've been actually working on this very question for decades. How do we build a coalition, and why hasn't it happened yet? Like, to me, as a policy nerd too, this, not a smart one though, but this seems like such a no-brainer. So what has been the barrier? Has it just been that there are losers and we haven't figured out how to make their pain less? One way to make, a trivial way to make pain less is to say, incumbent landowners, to the extent that your taxes go up, we take that incremental tax increase and we defer that until you sell the property or die. There's ways to do these little technical fixes to take away somebody's pain on tax, but I'm not sure if that's what's holding up a really good policy idea in the political world. Maybe people out there have more idea than I do. Andrew always has more ideas.
One thing that successful political movements tend to share is a simple moral frame that motivates people to see the issue in terms that make the desired conclusion of the movement obvious. This is why, for example, if you're rallying an anti-tax movement, you'll frame it as tax relief, to name a classic example many have heard of. So when we assert that, that nature should belong equally to us, you might use slogans such as, I don't know, off the top of our head, your labor, our land, just asserting that nature actually does belong to the public, hands off our climate, asserting that we do have this equal right to nature. We have to think carefully about the phrasing we use such that it implies the conclusion we want, such that it asserts through the grammar we choose the obvious conclusion that we need to establish this universal right to nature that implies the need for the solution we're pushing. Just cast the conversation in terms that imply it.
We've got time for one or two audience questions. You had your hand up.
I did, and it was more of an observation for Dave. I mean, what's your name? My name is David. I'm here from Sioux. Thank you for having me. Like, land value tax seems to be like one part of a whole suite of things we need to redistribute wealth. But we do have an inequality problem, and that's writ large. That's why we're here tonight, and that's been building for generations, maybe 2 or 3. As far as speculation on land at the municipal level, I mean, if we implemented development charges at the same time as rezoning applications, then that would impel the people to do more work, or to actually intend to see things through. It would put make them have some skin in the game. I had some other comments, and I apologize. They've escaped me. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. If I remember what they were, not any longer. Reclaim our land. How about that, Andrew? Right.
We've got time for maybe one more question, if anybody has a burning one. Frank?
Well, hi, I'm Frank Pebble. It's nice to be here in BC again. Try to get out here once a year because we had snow last night in Ottawa. So it's an escape. Back in 1996, we had a conference in Ottawa, pretty much like this. We were talking about the same issues. And we're trying to get some press notice of that. And during the conference, somebody got a Nobel Prize in economics. And then someone asked, well, nobody in Canada ever has been awarded the Nobel Prize in economics. And who is this guy? I said, well, he's Bill Vickery, and he's a co-winner with along Robert Merleys in Britain. And somebody said to me, well, why don't we get a hold of him and get him up to Canada? Because somebody also discovered that he was born in Victoria and moved away from here at the age of 4 years old to New York, and he was in his 80s at this point when he got the prize. And we said, well, we can get a lot of press. We say he's the first Canadian Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he'll come up and the press will all be there. It won't be hard to get him out for that. And then he could, what he's going to talk about, land value taxation. It was more site value taxation back then. And here's what happened. We're all sitting around, and this is like on the morning, and we're getting going with the day's events, and someone hands me a note, and he died. He started driving up from New York to Ottawa, was stopping by a TRED conference, which was an LVT conference in Boston, and then he was going to come on. So the whole group was very shocked. I'll tell you the story for one reason, is I disagree with our panel here tonight that LVT is going to crash housing prices. I don't think it's going to do that, and Bill Vickery also argued in some very learned papers that it wouldn't do that as well. So I think that some of your concerns are misplaced here. It will have distributional value. But just think, for instance, if your house in Vancouver is assessed at $1 million and 90% of that value is a land value, well, knocking off the building above is not going to make any difference to your tax bill, right? But it will redistribute. There will be distribution issues that are extremely important, and it will start to bring capital investment back into the community, localized capital investment. That's the way it does it. And that then will increase productivity over time. And that's the problem for politicians. The main one is that this is going to be a bit of a slow process. Most people will be dead in 20 years if it's a 5% increase over time. But I think where you have very high land value cities with low tax rates, then you can start to see a distributional shift there in a way that I think will be, people, describe Henry George as a producerist. So I do not think that we're going to see a crash. There's going to be crashes anyway under the current system. Yeah. They're big, the Georgist is predicting there's going to be one next year, right? But people will always blame it on something else, high interest rates or some kind of other conflagration of the system. But one of the main things he really wanted to do was to stop industrial depressions, industrial fluctuations they used to have then. So if you look at the subtitle, Progress in Poverty, it is to try to alleviate, business depressions and things like that, because that's where you get incredible distortions. People being thrown out of homes, like millions and millions in the U.S. in 2008, and it could easily happen again. And this time, of course, the capacity of government to respond to that with QE2 and whatever they come up with to print money, because that's the way they'll respond through inflation, is being limited a lot more. So I don't think we need to be as concerned as we seem to be here in the panel. Anyway, thank you. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Frank. Anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true that the way out of the housing crisis is not solely a land value tax. To steal a turn of phrase from Andrew here that I just absolutely love, and this applies to so many things, but it especially applies to housing. There is no silver bullet. We need silver buckshot. And I think a land value tax would be an excellent pellet in that buckshot. But there is so much more that needs to be done. We can't get out of this without building a tremendous amount of public housing. We can't get out of it without building more market housing. There is so much more to do than just an LVT. But I think, in my mind at least, the biggest way that a land value tax would help would be just encouraging that efficient use of land, so that in a downtown core like Victoria's, we don't look around and see surface parking lots everywhere when we're in the middle of a severe housing shortage, right? Those could easily be businesses, they could be homes. But our current economic system means that they can skate by being as close to useless as you can get in our current system.
I'll just add that Jack took the silver buckshot words out of my mouth, but I'll just, as a sort of a footnote to Jack's point, just to add that some of the other pellets in that gun, like zoning reform, can maybe offset some of the potential losses for the people who are losing in an LVT phase-in period. For instance, if we move to an LVT, property taxes on underperforming land or underused land go up. Property values presumably go down as a result. But what if we rezoned that land to add more value to it? So can we use zoning as a compensatory mechanism to make LVT more attractive and frankly encourage development in the right places where it needs to be?
Thank you. I just want to say thanks to the entire panel over here. And thank each and every one of you for being here with us for this very timely conversation. We're going to call it there, and please join us for some cake. Thank you.